Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
I haven't looked at the news yet today. I've been a little slow going, as you have apparently. Anyway, but I am fully dressed. I have socks on. Do you?
Yeah, I now have socks and shoes on.
Okay, well, with the podcast to be official of such a august state, we should actually, make sure we look good, right?
Yeah, I shaved.
Okay,
Um,
good.
I
All right.
moved my hair out of my face. Yeah.
So I haven't seen the news. It was my only point. So I don't know if there's a new Speaker of the House yet. I guess is not. But is there anything going on yet?
There's a lot of news and all of it's bad. So, but I don't think it's anything that we could
Shocking.
comment on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think it's interesting that the Constitution gives all the power to Congress, really. I mean, there's a little bit of power for the chief executive, particularly in foreign policy. And the
Hmm.
Supreme Court's paragraph, it's like two or three paragraphs, and it's really short. But really, all besides a very nice preamble, all the Constitution is about which article?
Yeah. The Article 2, the Congress.
No, Article 1.
Article 1. Sorry, Article
Yes.
1, the Congress.
Article, you got to ask the political science, not the history guy.
Well, the funny thing is, right before that we went live, my brain was also struggling to remember a very easy word
Yeah,
that
yeah.
popped in. Yeah, for those of
But
you
that's a
before
legal
we
word,
hit
not a his
record, I'm having a slow morning.
yeah, well, it's a legal word, not a historical word, but we'll get to that.
No,
But it
I
occurs
trust me, that's something I know that I know.
I know, and actually most citizens know
But
it
maybe
too.
it's it's like a Freudian slip because right before we got started, we were talking about how we always focus on the president no matter what. So
Yeah,
maybe, no matter what anybody asks, just shout Article 2, right?
yeah, that's funny. We go, "Thanks, Bush," or
Yeah,
whoever the president that we
yeah.
don't like
Thanks,
is now. Yeah,
Obama,
thanks
right?
thanks, Trump. Thanks, Obama. Yeah, and we'll get to that too. But it occurs that to me that, Congress really what happens if Congress doesn't do anything? I mean, like, last time they didn't before when they kicked out, McCarthy, your acquaintance, or maybe yeah, your friend or acquaintance, when Gates kicked him out, boy, his career sure went sideways. Um, what happens if Congress doesn't choose a speaker? What's the
Well,
remedy?
I guess sometimes I say the founders smile. That one of the things that we often say, oh well, if Congress isn't passing laws, then the government isn't functioning the way the founders intended. But the founders intended for our government to only act when um, uh, when you essentially had an overwhelming desire to act by the American people, matched with um, uh, considerable thought and debate and a long process where we've considered all of the terrible implications of acting. So, unlike many people, yes, I wish Congress would do their jobs because when we want things to be done, it should be Congress that does it. But if the American people haven't made up their mind on what they want to do, um, and it isn't overwhelming, it is Congress's job to do nothing. You
Well,
know,
wait, but seriously, that's a great point, and actually, I was almost hoping that would be one of our conclusions. So cool, today's show is over. Thank you. Um, no one talks like that, though. I haven't seen a single media report. I haven't seen a Facebook tweet. Citizens aren't sitting there going the role of Congress and what happens if they don't. None of that happens. So how did we go astray as a culture, demanding that Congress solve all our problems?
well, we went astray as a culture when we decided that everything needed to be a federal issue solved by the federal government, and what was good enough for us was intolerable in someone for someone else. This idea.
But isn't that just for because you and I are conservative? And I mean it in the authentic, historic way. There are very few conservatives apparently now because I don't hear conservatives say that. Do we?
No, no, not for years, no.
I
But
mean,
I think
not for decades, I don't think. Every single congressman has to solve every single issue, and they have to be a talking head on the news about the most local of issues. The
mhm.
president does the same, but congressmen, that's what they do. Why are we doing that? Why are we tolerating that as citizens?
Well, I mean, if our what our founders envisioned was that they what they were scared of was government taking too much power. They were scared of central authority. And they wanted to protect individual liberty. So essentially, we have a government that takes um, that makes, as I sometimes explain it, makes sure that the American people never get what they want. It's designed to take desire and add time and add logic and add debate and add um, uh, interest groups. It's funny. There was a Jonah Goldberg column last week about how um, there's, I think his point was something like, there's no such thing as the deep state, but we're going to hear a lot about the swamp or something along those lines.
Yeah, I
And
read that one.
that's what we call the swamp are interest groups. Everybody, it's funny. We'll hear people criticize lobbyists, but lobbyists are interest groups. And
They're
if,
gun owners, they're old people,
yeah,
they're pet owners, they're, hunters, they're every imaginable hobby.
business owners, right? Yeah, and they lobby Congress. So um, all of that was understood and anticipated by not just the founders, but by the early generations of politicians, Washington and Adams. And if anything, Jefferson kind of sometimes wanted more of that, but because he had the majority at his back. But at any rate, just some caveats before we start talking about how wonderful it would be if Congress was just able to pass every law that
Wait,
anybody
who
had
said that?
dreamed up. That's not really the way our system was designed. Our system was designed so that everything else would happen before we passed a federal law about it. You
You
know,
mean like states would pass laws that
Yeah,
culture would
cities would pass ordinances, states, counties would pass ordinances, states would pass ordinances. But before we even get to that part, individuals would try to solve the problem for themselves. I guess we don't want to ever skip that.
love that.
One of the things how Lincoln defined his philosophy of government when he was still a Whig, but I don't think it changed when he became president. But he said, proper role of government is to do for a community of citizens what they cannot do or do so well for themselves in their separate but individual capacities. And in all other things, government ought not to interfere. Meaning that what you do is you sit around and say, is this something I can do myself? And if it is, then I do. And is this something I can do with my family? Then I do. And is it something I can do with my friends? Then I do. With my church, with my, by voluntary associations. That was one of the things that blew Tocqueville away when he came to the United States. He's like, Americans join things, and I guess these are now bad because they're interest groups or they're lobbyists or whatever. But that, Americans would then join some sort of group to do a thing. And only when that failed or it would reach its logical conclusion is you'd say, okay, now we're going to start going to government. And usually it was, is the government doing something that's preventing us from solving this ourselves? And then and only then would you say, is this something that government must do? Um,
And then eventually at the congressional level.
Yeah,
So
but and then it would go up the levels of government. But before you ask yourself, is this something the government should do? I mean, I'm sure I know Jake and I have already made fun of um, the um, the high-speed internet bill that spent $42 billion and didn't hook up anyone to high-speed internet. Uh,
what?
yeah, and I this was something shared by Josh Dunn, the political scientist, and I commented I could have hooked nobody up to the internet for $41 billion and saved the American taxpayers $1 billion.
I
You
mean,
know,
that can't really be true. There must be some corollary to that.
Jake, you saw it too, didn't you? I'm pretty sure it was in the Washington Post. Did you see that story too? Yeah. And
Huh.
there have been several others, these sort of giant programs that spent um, tens of billions of dollars and did nothing. And it's been causing a lot of Democratic or liberal intellectuals to rethink their commitment to legislation, because they're saying that, because essentially, you remember that Biden spending bill was massive. They got they got everything. I mean,
Right.
and now they're looking at the results and they're saying that almost none of it did what it was supposed to do. And in some cases, it spent all of the money and accomplished nothing. And he's saying maybe we need to look at what regulation is doing to prevent even
Right. Government.
Congress
Right.
appropriating federal money to solve these problems, and it can't overcome the regulatory challenges. I mean, the biggest joke in California is the high-speed rail. And Jake, why don't you Google this for me really fast? How much has the California high-speed rail spent since inception? And
Well, but on NPR, I heard this long story about some city in Texas where they're building the world's largest chip manufacturer. Maybe it's New Mexico. I think it's Texas. I mean, it's a $1 trillion facility, and there's thousands of employees working on making sure American could provide our own microchips. That sounds worthy, right?
sure, but in the case of in the way this works when it's most effective is when the government is just either buying stuff or just mailing out checks. I mean, those are two. That's the most effective way that the government can use
Hmm.
dollars to accomplish a goal. If you give money to Ukraine to buy American arms, with that and then they turn around and spend that money on American, weapons and ammunition, um, that that's going to happen. you know, or if you say we're going to only buy American ships, and we're gonna dangle this giant pile of money out here for somebody who can um, uh, build chips, and uh, eventually somebody will, as we always say out here, if you have a fire hydrant that shoots money out of it, somebody's going to come along with a hose and hook it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the high-speed rail in California, $100 billion over budget, and never worked, never run. There is no high-speed rail in California. And
That has to be frustrating not only for liberals but for everybody. Um,
but
okay, let
anyway,
me.
if we get back to Congress, I know that's what you wanted to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah. Let's go to a couple scenarios here. A speaker will be chosen, right? Even if it's a big drama over several days or several weeks, a speaker will be chosen, although it's not required. What happens if a speaker's not chosen?
Uh, they don't get to keep going. I mean, but
Well,
I'm not even sure. It's going to be Mike Johnson, and I'm not sure
right.
there'd be a lot of
Well,
drama there.
well, okay. Let's take the next one though. What happens if they don't pass? There is a bunch of still conservatives. What happens if the tax bill of I don't know what it is, 6 years ago, is set to expire here in like February or March or April? I don't know, sometime early next
Hmm.
year. If they don't pass an extension of that, then it retroverts to what it used to be, right?
Right. Yeah. Then our taxes go back to what they were. Yeah.
And then that will be all sorts of rebellion because it did help the middle class. It really helped the rich, but it also helped the middle class, right? And there'll be a gnashing of teeth and a big problem. But also, it will expend the deficit and debt to astronomical amounts because the increase was only to when it expired, and now it's going to go for another 10 years or something, right? And then that will be yikes. I mean, so
Uh, I'm not. I'm usually pretty hawkish on debt, but most of those are uh, when you project out those tax cut bills, um, they tend to not move the needle too much on long-term debt.
I don't
Um,
know. I think this increased the debt a couple trillion. I don't think you're wrong on that, Professor.
all right. Well, I always like to point people to the Byron Riedel's chart book at the Urban Institute. He runs through all the various scenarios, basically taking whatever's in the zeitgeist of here's an idea that we have that we think will affect the debt over the long term, and he charts them all out. So yeah, thanks, Jake. Just put it in the chat here.
Oh, so we
It's
can
great.
all
It's a
debate
great
that.
resource. He updates it every year. I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying that it's not going to spike it like um, just baby boomers getting 1 year older.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. If Congress does nothing, well, no, President says he's going to do something on immigration on day one, maybe in the first 9 minutes or something. I think that's what he was doing in the first 9 minutes, but there may have been something else he was doing as well. Can the president do a ton on immigration, or does the president need to follow what the law is that Congress wrote on immigration?
Well, it, he can try to do a lot. And this is what he did in Biden and Obama. But essentially, they try to do things and then wait for the courts to stop them. That seems to be the trend over the last three presidents.
And by the way, should there
But
be a philosophical marker that either liberals or conservatives place that we don't like that no matter who's doing it, or yes, we have to get it done, we like that? I mean, shouldn't we be having this debate on whether that's good or bad?
I think I'm on record as not wanting a national daddy. You know, and I don't like elected dictators who just do whatever they want. So I'm against it, no matter who does it. Um,
It
you
doesn't
know,
matter their background or their philosophy or whether we agree with them or not, or whether it's just not the good way to govern, right?
right. And but I always want to make sure that people understand that I do have a carve out or a caveat or whatever for actual wars and in rebellions and insurrections. Like I
Okay.
understand that, yeah, that you're not breaking the law when you use those powers, but
And
you're
Professor,
breaking the law when you invent when you do it when there isn't a war or a
and the
rebellion.
The Constitution's pretty good on that, isn't it? It's pretty clear that we have one commander in chief. We don't have a Congress deciding. Even on the power to declare war, which I, by the way, have a bee under my bonnet. How's that for being old fashioned? I think all
Yeah,
sorts of millennials and X or Zoomers or whatever they're called these days use bee in the bonnet. That's a
yeah.
yeah.
I
I
that,
think Congress should declare war more than we're doing, and I resent when they don't. I think that's a bad trend. Uh, but besides that, it's pretty clear though that the president has enormous power in foreign policy and
yes.
immigration,
Yeah, and tariffs and trade,
terrorists.
you know, and they also have enormous power in the administrative agencies because Congress has given the president enormous power in the.
Okay, let's do a reminder again on Chevron. And Bart, whether you want to jump in and just give us a 1 minute, but I'm hoping that with a conservative president, well, he's not a conservative president, with a Republican president, a conservative House, they may be conservative, and a conservative Senate, they actually may still be a conservative Senate. Who knows? But the Republicans control all the branches of the federal government. I'm hoping that they start doing stuff by like writing more laws more specifically. And so to debate it, what you're talking about, going through committee work and having that gnashing of teeth and all these special interest groups weighing in and then writing law and then getting it through one house and going to the other house, that's probably not practical with the margins today. I don't know. Can you talk about what your perspective on that is, Bart, and the Chevron? I mean, because now all the power has to go back to Congress, right? Or what?
Well, it doesn't all have to go back to Congress, but Chevron actually, that whole Chevron deference standard was overruled. So the courts are not applying the deference they used to give to federal agencies when they take action on things. Now it's more of the courts have to perform a separate analysis of whether there's actually legal authority for a federal agency to do something.
But in practice, that means there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of regulations that will be deemed illegal.
Well, they could be. People could go back and challenge older regulations. That's a possibility. You know, that hasn't happened exactly yet. Although I think there are a couple lawsuits looming around out there over environmental regulations from years gone by and things like that. So
What are
yeah,
the
that could happen.
ramifications of the Chevron decision?
Right. Oh
What?
yeah.
No, what are there? What's that going to happen?
Well, what's going to happen? My God,
Did
this
you
is
love it when
Stephen's
John asked
department.
that kind of question, Bart? I'm so happy to see it happen to you. What's going to happen, Bart? Yeah.
Oh, here. Okay, I'll make it amateur, totally amateur prediction. I think there will be lawsuits where businesses feel as though agencies are going too far and they're making it difficult for business to develop their whatever it is they're trying to do. And that will happen, I think, mainly in the environmental area. It could happen with pharmaceutical industry,
Yeah,
um,
healthcare. But it could also
healthcare.
happen in the military industrial complex and what, or I mean, it could have I mean, even workers' rights, all sorts of stuff.
I don't know. Maybe on workers' rights. Yeah, you might get some stuff on that. Some lawsuits on that.
Less
I
labels
think with
on
the
ladders.
military, it's unlikely.
Less labels on ladders. I think I'm
Yeah,
joking.
I think business will keep its powder dry for more important things than labels on ladders.
All right.
Maybe ingredients on food,
Ah,
but because that can be a bigger deal for the agriculture industry and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of that. I think you will if President Trump attempts to do a whole lot of draconian immigration things. I think you'll see challenges to those things, and that's a little different from the Chevron standard because the courts have traditionally treated the president as having more latitude with immigration. I think in the military, you're not going to find very many challenges, mainly because, I don't know, in terms of like federal spending right now, from what I was reading last week, Elon Musk is receiving a great deal of federal spending right now, associated with, his various space expeditions. I don't think he's going to challenge any of that because he's benefiting from it. But there have been
I move to strike that from the record. I don't want Elon after any of us.
Yeah.
We
I
love
Well,
don't either, but
we love you, Elon. You're doing a great job. There, that's
I think I think the hope, at least among the Supreme Court and the legal evolution of this, has been a long time coming. But because I remember when Justice Scalia would point out these completely absurd regulations with no limiting principle. And then during the Obama administration, the EPA, I'm exaggerating, but they tried to define anything that gets rained upon as a navigable river,
right.
and the idea is that courts don't need to give that much deference to the experts of the administrative state when they're not really experts. They're especially enacting a political agenda. But I also am old enough to remember when elections were won and lost in California on the basis of too many of these things are falling into the hands of unelected judges it's the unelected judges who need to be reined in, because we were back in the 80s getting all these outrageous, and especially in the 70s and 60s before that, outrageous decisions from courts that were then so the a regular person can look at all this and say, this is all absurd, and it's hurting me, and say, well, this is a problem when the federal government does this. You say, well, this is a problem when judges do this, and maybe we should, plead to go back to let's not hurry to legislate. let's not hurry to have the government step in every one of these cases. I've just even as 25 years ago, just to get back to the point, I don't know why this is sticking in my brain, but that regulation is more expensive than corruption. Back when we had outright corruption, bribery, graft,
You're talking Mayor Daley stuff, huh?
Yeah, I'm talking about before that stuff was even illegal in the late 19th century. Um, it was we could still build bridges, you know, uh, because politicians needed to have that product and it needed to exist. And it, now the cost of regulation has far exceeded what bribery, graft, and corruption used to cost us, and we crossed that threshold 25 years ago.
Hmm.
Um,
It's
uh,
an
Okay,
interesting.
but we aren't seriously arguing in favor of corruption, are we, to
no,
replace
we're not arguing in
regulation?
favor of corruption, but we're just saying, there are costs and trade-offs to all of this stuff. And
Right.
if you try to chase down every penny, the cost of chasing down every penny exceeds the amount of, or why not just let the legal system catch up with corruption? Why does the regulatory state have to be involved with it? You know, um, for instance, when a secretary steals from a high school,
Hmm.
we say, oh, there ought to be a law. But, there's already a law against stealing. So why do but we leap to create a new regulation. We're going to hire a new person who's going to oversee how funds are expended, you know, and that ends up being far more expensive than prosecuting the crime in the rare occurrence when it takes place. Stealing's already illegal. We Passing a law to make it more illegal or harder to do often ends up costing us a lot more and preventing the good thing that had happened before. I mean, just to use the absurd example, but you know, um, we I'm an advisor for several clubs on campus, and now we have to account for every penny. But what does that mean? It Before, when we wanted to buy sweatshirts, we would just buy sweatshirts, and we had to sort of account for the money. So let's say the sweatshirts would come back with a cost of $11.27 each. And so we would just charge the students $12, you know, and the over would just go into the account. Well, now you can't do that. You have to give each student has to get a receipt, and it all has to be accounted for. And we went from being, a school where like one or two people are in there accounting for our accounting records to uh, 4 people working in that office. And here's the other thing that happens: we just stop buying shirts. You know, we used to do fundraisers for scholarships, but we had to account for every single penny of what we spent on buying the tri-tip or the hot dogs or whatever, or the buns from Costco. And then we had to issue, and by the way, no digital way of doing any of this. It all had to be done with cash, with handwritten paper receipts. And what did all clubs do? We just stopped doing it. Because at a certain point you're like, um, it's instead of having the kids go out and work for some scholarship money, we're going to put our attention instead. We're going to go find one local business who will write us a check for $500, and that will more than make up for it, you know, because, but what do we lose? We lose the thing where the students were out there, like, bonding and, and why? In order to counter corruption that has never happened. you know,
Why wouldn't they let credit cards be used? I'm just curious, because
I
that's
don't
actually a
know.
more accurate thing than cash, isn't it?
Can't you? I don't know. We just don't have I don't
So,
know.
um, I I
Yeah.
find it interesting and actually useful, but I hope we can put a exclamation point on this. Uh, the topic is Congress.
Yeah, yeah.
You're talking about sweatshirts at a college club level, not
Yeah.
even varsity NCAA stuff. You're talking about just a college club.
Right.
Put a underline under this. Why are
The reason we're doing that is because the school as an institution does not want to risk its state and federal funding by not having adequate controls over every single penny. And so some well-intentioned federal law that was designed to make sure that people didn't steal from colleges will have this effect on our behavior, even at the smallest level.
Yeah, that is a good example because there's thousands of colleges and tens of thousands of clubs, and somebody stole from a club, and somebody decided there ought to be a law, and the next thing you know, everybody's got to perform something that they didn't have to perform by just getting some sweatshirts for the kids, right?
Yeah, yeah, but I mean that's everybody who's ever tried to do anything in society, you know, uh, has a similar story.
So Mayor Anderson was mayor of Arvada. She's been on a time or two, and hopefully we can get her in early. She was also a small business owner for I think 30 or 40 years.
Well, I mean, I know she just logged in, but everybody who's ever been a mayor has an example, and I'm sure she does. So I'm gonna filibuster while I give her time to think of one, but has an example of a time when if the money had come from the state or the federal government with fewer instructions, you could have used it more effectively. You know, you could have gone further with it. Because I don't know if Mary Anderson is even
We'll see if she wants to take herself off
to
mute
take
or
ourselves off mute
put
and
herself on camera.
jump in. But everybody I know has stories about this where um, we could have built more roads, we could have built another building, or we built a building that we needed, but we didn't need as much as this other thing. You know, and that's the other thing is the strings attached alter your behavior. So you say, well, the money was there for a public safety building that we needed less than we needed a water treatment plant, but there was no money for a water treatment plant that year. So
Yeah.
we didn't, so we built a public safety building that, yeah, fine, I guess we sort of need it, but we're going to take it because that's what the state is giving us this year. Um, and you end up sort of chasing what the state is willing to give you rather than what's best for your community.
Yeah, interesting. And by the way, I think it would be hard to jump in and comment where we are in this
Yeah,
conversation with the topic about Congress. So,
right.
Mayor Anderson, jump in when you want to, if you want to, either by phone or video later when you're ready. So, Professor, um, today we start the debate on who's going to be a speaker. That might be settled today or it may go into next week. Who knows? But then January 20th comes along and the president's going to be sworn in. And he's going to start doing everything he did last time, except on steroids. He will be more effective this time. Agreed or disagreed?
I don't know because there are some people around him who are more effective, but second level grifters and hangers ons and people who are corrupt and wacky, the every government is full of those people, but um, the Trump administrations have been maybe more full of those people.
Yeah,
So
they're going
even though
after
we've
him.
got some top level people, I'm not, I'm not convinced that
He'll be
everybody's a
more
super.
effective just because of their lack of ability or experience or interest. Yeah. Um, Fine. But they will be, uh, at least give me this. Well, no, you don't have to, but we will be talking about President Trump every single day for 4 years, will we not? I mean, every citizen. I mean, except for the ones that are wise and out hiking. But I mean, it will just be madness after this weird thing, after that. I mean, it won't that at least be on steroids?
I mean, I
I
don't
know
know
he's a little older,
because the media environment has fractured even more in the last 4 years. So I don't know. I don't know yet because the things that kept the sort of Trump, machine going, will people start watching CNN again?
but I don't think they need to watch CNN. The weird comment will get them on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or Instagram. I mean, we have lots of activist friends, millions of them across America, that will identify wherever they get their source of news and then expound on it and send out some weird meme and some weird mean tweet. And I mean, that will keep going on steroids, won't it? It's worse now.
Yeah, I just don't know where it's going to come from. I don't. I'm trying to think of where I see the craziest things now. and where my craziest friends get their news. But I think almost all of them get them from Instagram Reels, and
Yeah,
which are often TikTok videos that were ported over to Instagram.
yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if, with what happens to TikTok, if all of that insane content creation just moves over to Instagram, or because um, the blue sky seems to be where a lot of people, some people are migrating over to, but I just don't think that anything has the power to create this sort of outraged, steamrolling,
You mean
snowball that,
you mean
that Twitter
I,
used to have.
'cause I disagree with this. So this is kind of new to me. Your premise. You're saying that President Trump slash Twitter was so powerful 8 years ago that every news source picked up that tweet, and now half the country abandoned Twitter. So even if the half the country picks up that tweet,
I'm saying
only
there's both halves. It was Trump was tweeting, but then all of Trump's critics were also on Twitter.
oh,
So
so
so it was
they
that combo of both of them, and every journalist was on Twitter. And so every news agency, the next day you would see the same outrage over the same thing,
because you
because
can pick up
the
your 5
outrage is,
or 10 favorite sources to see what they're saying and then write a story about that,
yeah, yeah,
right? But
yeah,
now
and
they don't even see that news. They're off of it. So they don't.
yeah,
Huh.
but there's also, it's just there isn't that sort of critical mass. It's not able to create that zeitgeist that it was able to do. So I'm just saying I don't know. I don't know what this is going to look like, because I don't know where that energy goes. I mean, I assume that yes, there will still be nonprofits and fraudsters spamming your inbox of your email, but
Political
uh,
parties. I see my
yeah,
friends put occupied
there'll be some
Democratic
of that.
all
But
the time.
I'm just thinking about, my friends who have become like pro Hamas. Where does that come from? You know, and defending terrorism and rape and that kind of thing. And um, I don't know that there is. I don't know where the radicalizing core is going to go.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and I'm sure we're still going to be talking about President Trump every day, but that's because he's going to be doing something outrageous every day. Um, he's going to be saying something outrageous almost every day. I remember in his last term, sometimes like there would be a weekend when he was playing golf or something, and it would be like, oh, this is nice. There might be one day when he doesn't do something crazy. Uh, but I don't, I just don't know. I don't know where this is going to come from, and I don't know how it's going to get to us. I,
Well,
I, I do think that um, the various substacks might be where
Mhm.
this all goes, because Substack's been around for a while. Um, Dispatch started on Substack. Free Press is now over 1 million subscribers on Substack, and everybody I know, this is where they're moving to.
yeah,
Um,
and you see,
I,
I've started to transition myself. So, uh,
so maybe it's going to be within 2 years the Substack algorithm of which stories that Substack is feeding to us that becomes capable of creating a zeitgeist and directing our anti-Trump outrage or something.
so Professor, I'm going to transition again. I want you to talk a little bit about historically the pressures between Article One powers and Article Two. I think so. We've talked a little bit about the president, and we talked a little bit about Congress, but whatever the president tries to do without new congressional action will likely be stymied by people like Bart. He even did it with us today. He jumped in and goes, "Oh, I'm not sure we can legally say that," well, or whatever he said. Lawyers do that all the time. Every single department and every agency and every city and every county and every nonprofit and the whole swamp, they all have lawyers. And they're saying, well, yeah, the president told us to do something. And then the agency lawyers going, yeah, but there's no law that says we can go arrest a journalist. Or, they're, like, well, wait, I'm a FBI agent. I'm not going to go well, I'm not going to go do that. Well, you're ordered to. And they go, well, yeah, but we got a lawyer right here saying, don't do that because you might be held liable. I mean, lawyers have a tremendous power in society. Do they not, Professor?
Outsized. I mean, there any specialist in a world that a non-specialist is thrown into is very powerful. So, it's no different than if you don't know anything about cars and you take your car to a mechanic, you don't know how this is supposed to go, and you have to rely on them.
Yeah, or a building, a bridge, or yeah. I mean, just go. I don't know how that bridge works, but yeah,
And
engineer.
so, I jumped in the ocean with my friend Steve Hayward on the New Year's Day.
I'd like to
And
join you for that.
yeah, you come out and go to Cayucas at noon. It's a great thing. And they were asking me what my resolutions were, and I thought, oh no, I don't have any resolutions. So I thought I'll just go with my standard resolution is I want nothing to do with the healthcare system or the legal system. You've had a good year if you have almost no contact with the healthcare system or the legal system.
Yeah, that's really wise. That's really wise.
But why? It's because you're completely vulnerable and at their mercy. That's how I always feel. So,
yeah.
Next to the all-powerful Bart, who can who can wield his lightning bolts of power that when he moves in.
Hey John, can I ask the professor a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Professor, can you explain? Well, all right. Is Congress's current activity, how does it measure up to what Congress has historically done throughout U.S. history?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, in some ways it tracks many things in society where we confuse activity with accomplishment. Because if you go back and you look at the actual work that was producing actual legislation, congressmen were doing more of that, and they were doing it in less time, and they were doing it in fewer days. So but now if you're a congressman, you're working 364 and a half days of the year, and you're doing something, but it's not related to writing and debating legislation.
Right. And that's kind of where I was trying to get you to go a little bit. Because, when I was way back when I was actually in high school, I interned for a member of Congress, actually from California, because that's where I grew up. And I remember that.
Who was the congressman? Can you say?
Can I say who it was? Yeah, it was George Miller III, not related to me.
All right.
And he became very powerful, and he was there for a really long time. But here's what I'm trying to get at is that I think the Constitution, if you go back and look at the Federalist Papers and all of that stuff, the Constitution envisioned that Congress would be super important, probably more important in reality than the presidency. But we have inverted that now for probably most of American history.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. Professor, you need to weigh in on that. I'm not sure that's
true. Let me hear phrase it the way. Don't change the wording. What it was the exact thing you said?
John or me?
Either one of you, because when you were talking over each other, I couldn't quite.
I'm sorry.
What I'm supposed to disagree with.
No, what I was saying was I think Congress has become less important than the original intent. And John said, oh, that's really not true throughout most of American history. What's your reaction to that? Was that kind of where you were going, John?
Well, I mean, I agree with your first point that the founders wanted Congress to be powerful and the executive to be weak. I agree with that. And you said that's not, and that probably didn't happen throughout most of history. That's what I disagree with. I think there was a
Okay.
change. I don't know whether it was 100 years ago or I don't know, even Tip O'Neill and Reagan actually had legislation. And I just haven't seen legislation. I guess we had healthcare under Obama. You know, there have been pieces of legislation, but I think Congress has become so weak over our lifetimes. I'm not sure that's throughout the whole history of the United States, though. So, but we have an expert here. So, Professor, what do you think?
Well, I'm trying to think in sort of like quadrants, in the pre-Civil War, and you almost have to take anything having to do with slavery and black people and say, okay, we're going to exclude that, because
Oh,
uh,
Why
explain.
would you exclude that,
well,
Stephen?
because of what I'm about to say, which is
Okay.
that we did have a long history of legislators discussing legislative issues and thinking about what's best and arguing for the interests of their constituents, but they would also listen and modify their beliefs. And I would just say they were engaged in that behavior with anything that didn't have to do with slavery, because when it came to slavery, they were just representing their constituents and not listening to reason, and you could not be convinced, right? Um, and uh, and that, but you saw legislators changing their minds on canal bills and what's best, and and it's kind of like slavery in the 19th century was the equivalent of like what they used to call the abortion distortion, which is that in every issue except for abortion, we're willing to listen, um, but but it was I don't want to pretend like this was somehow a glorious high-minded process. It wasn't often. I mean, in many cases, we're talking about corrupt people who are in their corrupt interests, and the messy business of politics, of trading votes and all that, and party politics and personalities, and it was always complicated and messy. The big change in the late 19th century with the rise of what you might call progressivism, this idea that somehow our system is not good enough, that we shouldn't rely on individual people expressing their views through their elected representatives, and that our system needed to be replaced by something more efficient. I mean, that in a way, the rise of these people who said, no, it needs to be pragmatic, it needs to be efficient. And if only experts could be in charge, and we need to fix the United States. And this was essentially Woodrow Wilson's argument, that if we're not going to have a new constitutional convention and destroy the United States and rebuild a new country on a more rational basis, we should just change what the words mean and invent it, and this gives rise to the sort of a very aggressive living constitution doctrine that says that this generation just will define the Constitution as being the opposite of its original meaning.
When did that evolution tip? When was that time era?
Well, it's an idea that is growing almost immediately post-Civil War in the United States. Um, and it's reaching its sort of fever pitch. Well, it's hard to say because people are sort of arguing in that direction from, say, the 1870s up until today. I mean, you'll hear people say all the time, "Oh, I listened to a podcast where retired Supreme Court Justice, who's just retired, but he's still alive. Brennan? No.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Brennan.
And, after
I
listening
think you're
to
talking about Stephen Breyer, right?
Stephen Breyer.
Nice to have a lawyer
Yeah, just again, my brain's fuzzy this morning. Don't stop drinking coffee. Coffee is like electric, brain food. But yeah, so I listened to this long interview with Breyer, and it was interesting. And you find a lot. He's a decent guy, and there's a lot to agree with. But then when he gets down to it, and he was being pushed by the interviewer, he comes down to just essentially saying, we need to figure out what the consequences are and be pragmatic. And what podcast? It was one of his former clerks, who's a law professor.
He also did a series of interviews on NPR that had a similar feel to it.
Yeah, but he really had his feet held to the fire. But my point is that he was saying sort of, we just need to be pragmatic, and that judges should think about what the consequences are. And what he's really saying is, how do I want this case to end up?
Right. Or
And,
how
and
to
that's how and that was always Scalia's problem with this, is no matter what kind of addressing you put on this, eventually it just comes out, how do I want this case to end up? And then let me find a way of ruling that way, in a way that makes sense. And I'm just going to call it pragmatism.
so
Um,
that you're right, Professor. That doctrine is alive and well today. There's been a huge pushback against it with
Yeah,
the
I mean, what do you
conservative.
think that Elon Musk is? A government efficiency doge, right?
Uh-huh.
But I don't know that these people would understand that they're actually arguing for the old progressive. I mean, that's why it's so strange to me, because it's like, do you realize that you're making the old progressive, um, Wilsonian, um, argument about the role of government? that that I mean, nobody's against efficiency, so that's why it's maybe you get into these arguments, it ends up being like DEI, like, what's your problem with diversity? And I'm like, no, my problem's not with diversity. And I'm not against efficiency either. But what I'm against is this idea that you can replace what our founders envisioned, and that what you're going to get is something better. um, you're not going to get something that's better than what, in my historical view, than what the American people would come up with on their own, if they were just left alone, with laws keeping them at peace with one another, and working out these differences. That Because what ends up happening in every case is the people with the levers of power just pull them the way they want. Is it any wonder that Trump is now critical of the TikTok legislation, now that he's got the tech bros and the social media companies, um, you know, sort of, that would benefit financially? What about all the guys who are saying all of a sudden, oh, we should have reserve currency in crypto? Well, every single person who's making that argument has a financial investment in crypto. Like, yeah, it just so happens that this decision will make them go from being, billionaires to multi-billionaires. I I just think that it's window dressing for something that the founders already envisioned, which is, if you have this kind of an argument, make it. Um, and But you don't get to claim that to be the arbiter of truth. Our system is designed to balance the interests groups, but they're not supposed to be able to claim. Or in many ways, it's the same thing that people do with science. They just sort of stamp their hand and say it's science. You can't disagree with it, and you end up sounding like Will Ferrell from Anchorman. Yeah, he used to say, pound the table and say it's science. You're not allowed to disagree. Like, some things aren't science. Not everything can be
So,
figured out with efficiency.
so John, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Along a historical line with Congress, wouldn't it be better at this point if Congress went, I believe that, and I may be wrong about my history here, okay? But I think throughout American history, Congress has been used for people to develop arguments about why certain policy decisions should be made. And Jonah Goldberg says all the time, democracy and Congress and everything, it wasn't made for unity. It was actually made for disunity. I think one of the big problems we have now with Congress, and I guess I'm not really asking a question here, is that people are substituting unity for efficiency and accomplishment. The reality is, I want Congress to be as ununified as possible. I want people making arguments about why something is a good idea or something is not a good idea. Right now, what most members of Congress are doing is trying to get noticed by social media. And you don't have to have a good argument to get noticed by social media. You can be completely outrageous and unserious. So the organization, the entity of Congress is not capable of being serious because we have too many people whose sole concern is being noticed by social media. That's just my theory anyway. I mean, do you have any historical views on that? I mean,
I don't, it's bad, but there have always been celebrities. I mean, I remember this. There's a great letter that Theodore Roosevelt wrote to, and I always forget if it was to Lincoln Steffens or Upton Sinclair, but he talks about this sort of progressive guy and the pro-business guy or the populist guy trying to solve problems. And he says, to diabolize one or deify the other would be absurd, because all you would get if you
Sorry, what, Professor? What was that word?
turn one of them into the devil and turn one of them into God.
What was the word, though?
Diabolize, yeah. Like turn one of them into the devil, right? And to deify, turn the other one into God.
Yeah.
Would be absurd, because they add nothing to the national conversation. They do nothing to advance any useful legislation. They are, as he says, they get popular at Chautauquas, which is, think of it as being like they get popular on TikTok. They get speaking invitations. But all that you would end up getting if you watched one would be the same pleasurable excitement you would get is what you'd get from watching a spotted circus horse.
A spotted circus horse. What a great quote.
I mean, and you're going to get nothing out of this. Yes, and Bart found the podcast. It's America's Constitution with Akil Amar. That was the interview with Stephen Breyer that I listened to yesterday.
Gosh, now you're making future listeners do some research. Excellent.
Yeah, and then it was Lincoln Steffens, according to Jake Peterson.
Yeah. So, Professor, I'm hoping Lorraine's going to ask a question here in a second, but let me tee her up and let's see if she'll bite at this one. All my liberal-leaning friends are petrified about Trump and the next 4 years. And I've seen the 5 stages of grief or whatever, and they're all in various phases of it. And a lot just want to like move to Europe or like pay no attention to it or get ready to rebel. There's all sorts of weird stuff out there. And it's not good hearted, it's good meaning. They truly are nervous. They think Trump is destroying America, and it's all going to happen starting in, I don't know, 17 days. I, for some reason, have a more peaceful, easy feeling because of Congress, the courts, oddly enough. The liberals would think that's a crazy statement, but the courts, and I've just suggested earlier, lawyers. And everyone's sworn to uphold the Constitution. There may be a loyalty oath that you also have to be loyal to Trump. Fine. But the law says you're swearing to the Constitution. You can have some informal arrangement to be loyal to Trump. The push gets to shove, you're going to have a lawyer saying you could do prison time here if you do this. I think everybody who raises their hand and then has a lawyer say you could do prison time, I think they're going to be careful on what's the law and what's my role and how do I execute the president's wishes. And it will be a constraint. I'm not as nervous about President Trump as I was even 6 months ago. Do you think liberals are nuts, or do you think I'm nuts, or is there some in between way to look at this? I kind of go back to the Constitution as a guide, and the president's a powerful person, no doubt. And Elon Musk apparently is powerful. And frankly, I don't care. I'm a citizen of the United States and I've got a lot of power too. So, can you give some historical guidance on where we are to bring some? Maybe you don't have as many liberal friends as I do. I'm telling you, my liberal friends are just beside themselves with chaos and fear and anger and resentment towards the other half of America. They're a mess right now. Can you give some salve to our liberal friends out there? Is America going to be okay?
Me?
Yeah.
Um, I prefer almost if you would be more specific about like his, I would say of my liberal, I don't know about liberal friends, but leftist friends and people of various, political
I
agendas.
mean liberal, not left.
Yeah. Well, but there are a lot of people who are hysterically, concerned about many issues. And um, here's what I would say. You should not be worried about, and this is an issue that we deal with at my school quite a bit. You shouldn't really be worried about mass deportations. I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of self-deportations. I don't think you need to worry about um, gay issues, lesbian issues. Um, I don't think I'm just trying to run through everything I've heard from my sort of liberal friends over the last few weeks. Um, there are certainly things you should be worried about. I, I don't know. I just think that it's let me just say, I think it's counterproductive to be worried about something that hasn't happened yet. So this is one thing I learned in the last Trump administration. Keep your powder dry. He's going to try to overwhelm us with content, and it's going to be very difficult to sort out what's real and what's not real. So step one, I think, should be wait until you figure out if this is real. I do think that one of the, whatever Stephen Miller has his hands on, you should be worried about. He's a bad person. Um, and there are some
You're not
other.
worried about Stephen Miller and all his goons and cronies going after you, are you? If he's a bad
No,
person,
well, I'm
why are
not
you
worried.
into it?
I don't know. No, I don't. I'm not worried about him. Again, I'm not worried about it because it hasn't happened yet. But I think that there are people within the Trump administration who are going to try to do really bad things. And but they also tend to be pretty incompetent. So, and it's almost a sliding scale, the more evil they are, the more incompetent they tend to be. So usually they're ineffective at achieving, because the other thing is they almost always have some novel theory and they end up overreaching, so it'll be, oh, well, I have this crazy, view of the Constitution that no one else does. And so
But
I
then,
think we have the authority to do this. And then the
then a
court will
court
come in
will
and say, you
stay it.
can't do that. Are you
Yeah, the
crazy?
court will stay that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it
So,
will be in delay for a couple of years, and then then Democrats will probably take over Congress in 2 years. So, or at least the House in 2 years.
so my biggest fear is about having someone in office who's um, erratic during a real emergency, you know,
That's a good point.
which because especially in foreign policy, we face several areas that are somewhat on the precipice, and you never know when one of these things is going to go. But Russia and Iran are under real pressure right now. And the only thing propping them up is China. And it's unclear when China is going to make its next move. And if it's in the next 4 years, I'm just going to wish that we could get George H.W. Bush from the dead and put him back in office. somebody with extensive foreign policy experience who's interested in the long term and willing to make unpopular decisions and build coalitions and act slowly and all of these things that we like in a foreign policy leader. And Trump just has none of those. If one of these things tips into a crisis. So I'm more concerned about that than I am the sort of domestic policy implications. I think those are going to be, incompetent and evil people trying to do things that I'm not sure they're going to be able to do.
So if let me say it in my words, not yours, but in just to repeat it a little bit. If you're an immigrant, you may have some issues here. I mean, there is no doubt there
You're here
may,
illegally. If you're here illegally,
sorry, an
what
illegal,
they're going to heavily incentivize self-deportation.
yeah. And
So
that's a stress that we shouldn't minimize. That's really an uncomfortable thing because you may be married to an American citizen or your kids are American citizens, but all of a sudden you may just not be able to work as well as you did, and you may need to leave and you go with your family or not. I mean, it's a big deal. If you're an illegal immigrant, this is a big deal. If
yes,
you're a parent of a trans kid, this could be a.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, if you're the parent of a trans kid, I I don't I don't think it's going to. I mean, if you want puberty blockers and that sort of thing, and you want the government to pay for them, yes, but like, I just the I don't know.
Yeah,
This is
that's fair
this
enough.
is
I don't.
this is a but I just don't know of anybody who's in that situation who isn't rich. So
Oh, I know a couple middle income people. I do.
maybe, but the 4 years is a long time in the life of a child, but um, I I don't. I think it's one of those things also that is better served by waiting a little bit. Um, so I don't. I'm not overly concerned, I guess, with the idea that um, there might be somebody out there saying, "Well, I want puberty blockers for my 13-year-old, and I want it to be paid for by the government right now." And I would just say, let's. You might want to pump the brakes on that a little bit, and it might benefit both you and your child to
But we're
wait
on the same
until you're 18.
we're on the same page though that change is coming between the Biden administration and the Trump administration, and that issue, some kind of change is happening. Agree or disagree?
Well, I mean,
Without congressional action.
without absent legislation, nothing's going to change. But what is changing is some of the, how they interpret the administrative law. But because the law hasn't changed on any of this stuff. So what we had before was just Biden making up a new interpretation. So
Right.
you might see that undone.
Right.
But in terms of the law, Trump won't be able to do anything other than change,
Reverse what Biden did.
revert back to what it was before.
Right. And
Um,
that's going to happen on day one, probably. Okay. Professor, we've gone over an hour. Mayor Anderson, you're under no obligation to show your video or take yourself off mute. But we always like to have you're not a newcomer. I think you've joined us before. But we'd like to encourage you to ask a question of Professor Tootle of whatever you'd like. Congress, President, I know you well, and you have some concerns about the new administration. Do you want to keep muted, or would you like to ask a question? Give you 5 seconds,
he's
Lorraine.
trying to take it
Unmute.
off. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I happen to be acquainted with someone with a trans child. I don't think the issue at all is whether the government pay for it, but that they be able to do the transition without government interference. I think it's a very emotional thing, and I don't think it's just money. But I do want to say something about Congress. I am hoping that there are some Republicans within Congress that have the courage that when Steve Miller's stuff gets there for them to act on, that they act properly for the United States of America. I'm hoping there are some people there, and it won't take much. It won't take but a handful of good Republicans to do that. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Stay on for a second, Lorraine. Professor Tootle, I have wondered, when I ran for county commissioner, I needed to raise, I don't know, I think it was $40,000 and successfully win among the Republicans. And then the Democrats didn't challenge me. It would have been another 50,000 if a Democrat incompetence challenged me. But it was small fries, $100,000 for a race, big deal. Lorraine, what did you run when you were on city council? How much money did you have to raise and spend?
The first time was $800.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the last time?
But uh, oh, it was probably 8,000. But I
Okay.
never had to do what our current city council has had to pay.
What's it
It's
gotten up to?
outrageous.
What ballpark? What's your guess on what it's gotten up to?
Oh, I think the last race for mayor was over 100,000.
Wow, for a small city, wow, that's a lot of money. Okay, that's good context, Professor. It is possible that Elon Musk could put $1 million into a legislative race if they don't agree with a Congress race, if they don't agree with what Trump's doing and they're balking. To Lorraine's point, she's hoping there'll be some Republicans with courage. And Elon can just say, I'm putting in $1 million for a primary. We're going to primary you, and here's $1 million to the best candidate. He could do that with 435 House seats. He spends another 435 million. Or do you have any concerns about where we are in that? Or no, that's the free market?
Oh, I'm always concerned about that because this is the eternal tension of, um, a free market, which is that zero always stays at zero and the other number keeps getting bigger. And so you end up with these people with an outsized influence in politics because they have an outsized influence in everything. The difference between a millionaire, someone with a job versus someone with $5 million versus someone with $10 million, compared to someone with $100 million. The amount that it would take to swing every city council race in the Central Valley would be a rounding error on Tesla value of Tesla stock. But the funny thing is that most of your tech bros are really bad at politics, and they don't know how to do any of this stuff. So you can also waste a lot of money. Harris famously spent how much did she spend? In 30 days, and everybody was like, "Where did this money go?"
100 million, yeah.
Yeah, $500 million, right? $1.5 billion. Yeah. So it's really easy to waste this because, as I think everybody on this panel knows, that if you can still reach your voter individually, that can overcome money. Because in politics, money helps you get votes, but the vote is the currency of politics. The vote is the money of politics, and Elon Musk could sweep into a mayor's race and with $1 million. But if that mayor knew everyone in town, and was able to knock on every door. And it's a race where you only need 2,500 votes in order to win. Like, it doesn't matter how much, because the other thing that happens, and we used to find this all the time, is sometimes big donors would have, again, strings attached to their money, and they would want to do stuff that was completely absurd, that made no sense for the campaign. What money should do, and when it was most effective, was when it freed up our candidate. If we had a good candidate, it freed him up to not go out and fundraise.
And have to fundraise.
So if we had a good candidate,
Yes.
I mean, now you don't have to fundraise. Now you can go and knock on more doors yourself.
Knock door to door. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Professor, there's 879 homes in my square mile, so it's fairly dense. So we were on a third to a quarter acres, but that's a lot of homes. So what is that? Probably 1,000 voters. It's been a while since I've looked at my precinct. How many times do you think I've walked that in my 40 years, from high school when I was raising money for my club time back to last year? How many times do you think I've walked those 879 homes?
In 40 years, I bet you have walked it 10 times.
Yeah, 25 times at least.
Okay.
I'm a old-fashioned campaigner. I go and knock door to door and say, "Hi, I'm John. I'm your neighbor 3 blocks over, and I just want you to know there's something happening over here, and I want you to care about it." And most people disagree. It doesn't matter. I've done it 25 times. So you'd need 100 of me in a city the size of Centennial, 105,000 or whatever. You need 100 really strong activists that know how to campaign door to door. But I'd fight against $1 million with 100 people.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing that's difficult is, and this is what we tend to see in California. I don't know if it's happening in Colorado, but
Not to your extent. Well, yeah, there's a couple congressional races. There's 2 or 3 swing races. Yeah.
what you have is often, like, and many of this came from the Black Lives Matter money sort of trickling down, and then that would then fund a nonprofit that was supposed to ostensibly be a nonprofit, but they're not really a nonprofit, and they're not supposed to be engaged in political activities, right? But they are.
Exactly.
And what they do is they'll go out and hire people and find candidates to run against, and they'll, so it means that now and we did have somebody in the last election here, a good candidate who lost. And the reason she lost is it'd been 20 years since she had an opponent, and they filed late. She didn't even have a candidate statement. She didn't know she had an opponent because they came in the day. And then all of a sudden you come in and, with this opponent who has, on paper, a few $100,000, but also has this giant nonprofit doing things that are
It's tough. I agree. Those people they hire at $15 an hour or $10 a door or whatever they do, they don't know the neighborhood though. They're just some stranger from some other community that are so it's hard to fight them, but it's not impossible.
Right, and where you really get it in these marginal races, and
Yeah.
but
Agreed.
they can swing seats. They definitely can.
Sure can.
But I just don't want you to be, for every Elon Musk who's doing this, there are, the fact that, Harris was able to raise and spend $1.5 billion,
Yeah.
will tell you that within the fundraising structures of the two parties, there's a lot of money there, but it's all from the top down,
Yeah.
And
I
I would
wanna
just always say that the people who need it are not the ones who are getting it because of the weak party structure. One of the most important things back in the good old days when, was we used to have to recruit candidates, and we would try to recruit actually like good people.
Yeah, real people.
Yeah. I mean, and then we say, okay, we've got this good person. Now let's move them slowly through the ranks. We would have them serve on a commission or a board or a nonprofit, and you get them to know people in the communities, and then say, okay, how are they doing? Right? They're doing okay. Well, now let's move them up to some elected board, or let's move them up to city council, right? And if they do okay there, well, then let's move them up to county supervisor. And if they did okay there, then we run them for assembly. And if they did okay there, then, but each one of these things was a sort of test of their character, but also a test of their ability to build and maintain coalitions. And and each time you're building up name recognition as well. But if it's happening sort of from the bottom up, that tends to be a pretty robust. I mean, I remember when there was so much money coming in against Devin Nunes. I mean, I don't think he faced, just because people hated him, right? And but because so many people in town knew him, that most of those attacks just didn't land, because it'd be like, I know Devin, like, what are you talking about? And they'd say, oh yeah, he's a little hothead, he's a little, but even when he would say outrageous things or something, like, because people knew him personally, they go, oh, that's just how he is, he'll be fine once he calms down. I remember when we played softball and he said this, but 10 seconds later he came over and said he was sorry, or you know what I mean, like, but if you personally know people, you can withstand those kinds of attacks. And
Old
by the way,
fashioned
he's also
retail politics can still work. It's
he
hard.
had plenty of money too, by the way. I don't want to underestimate that, because
Yeah, agreed. Hey, Professor, I want to end with this by giving Lorraine one last shot. Lorraine, you spent 30 plus years in the Republican Party and were very highly regarded and a very successful, well known elected official. So thank you for all that. And at some point, you transitioned away from the Republican Party. And no disrespect, but you're probably a Democrat if you're not registered a Democrat now. And I don't mean to label you, actually. You can be whatever you want to be. But that's just for setting for people that listen to this in the future. You have some real fear about the incoming Trump administration. And I want you to, if you're willing, I want you to articulate just a moment of it. And then Professor Tootle is going to put a stop on your fear. He's going to make you feel better about where we are. Historically, he's going to make us feel better where we are as Americans. So that's my tee up. Do you want to take a swing at this, or do you want to ask whatever you'd like to ask?
Well, I guess my total fear is that there are no people in Congress that will be able to stop legislation that's harmful for our country. And I think that's the issue. And I always considered myself, John, as a pro-choice Republican, and a fiscal conservative.
Yeah. Which is what I've done all my life. So you have a fear that Congress isn't going to be strong and the founders' intent isn't going to be executed for the next 4 years. Professor Tootle.
Right.
Yeah, Professor Tootle.
Well, on the issue of being pro-choice, Donald Trump made the Republican Party a pro-choice party.
Well,
In a way he did. In a way he did. It's interesting. We'll see.
There aren't, at least for now, the idea of whatever you consider the federal absolutist pro-life position is no longer represented at the national level.
Yeah.
And as far as Congress, I don't think Congress is going to be able to pass anything. I would not worry about stuff coming out of Congress, because the margin in the House is razor thin.
Yeah, 3, maybe 4, 5. Yeah.
So the only thing that's going to come out of the House, and remember, in the Senate, it's got to be 2/3. So that means effectively it's a tie in the Senate too. So the only thing that you're going to get that passes is going to be something that passes muster with the majority of Democrats, the majority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate. And President Trump is going to have to sign it. So the only legislation that you're going to get in the next 4 years is going to be something that is acceptable by the majority of Democrats, the majority of Republicans, and President Trump. And I think that's going to be a very small list of laws, and I don't think any of them are going to be anything that Americans would, that the vast majority of Americans would need to worry about.
Are you not worried about an imperial presidency for at least
Yes, that's what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is
Oh,
all of the attempts that he's going to make to circumvent this process because of how frustrating it is to go through the actual process. That's the
I thought you were
concern.
going to put a salve on Mayor Anderson's concerns. Now
Well,
you're
she mentioned she said she was worried about Congress, so I can make her feel better about that. You know,
well, as because I see Congress being able to stop any kind of legislation that would be harmful for the country. And just because of what we have seen with Trump and what he has done before, and now all the money and all the people that control our information are in his camp and giving him money and
yeah,
giving a basis.
Mayor,
You
I'm
know,
not concerned about Congress being able to write legislation to overturn an executive order. I think the executive orders are going to just come here and there all over the place. I do think, though, as Professor Tootle pointed out, maybe before you signed up or signed in, that the swamp or the special interest groups in their lawsuits are just going to be equal to the amount of executive orders. And that will probably bog things down in the courts while we sort things out. I don't think Congress will have the ability to act. Agree or disagree, Professor Tootle?
no, I agree. But I also will throw in the other caveat that I don't think anyone's in charge of the media anymore. You know, that uh, nobody can control the narrative anymore. I don't think anyone's in charge of
Last,
the media environment is so wildly fractured and fragmented right now that when I talk to I don't think it's funny you had over the years made reference to like you don't know if I talk to any liberals. I don't talk to any conservatives. I have a handful of conservative friends, but they live in other places. The people in my actual life, I can't think of any of them who would agree. So I never hear any conservative perspective on it. I've taught at colleges my whole life. Who
yeah,
do you think I go to work with every day? So uh, as far as what they are concerned about, one of the things that happens though is when I'll come to them and three of them will be really concerned about something that I've never even heard of. And it's because they listen to some podcast or some TikTok or but it'll be something that nobody else, I'm like, I don't know where you're getting this. I
yeah,
mean, the closest thing to a liberal consensus, I would say, you might say the Atlantic. I guess like old liberals will sometimes all be concerned about the same thing because there was an article in the Atlantic, but I can't think of any other publication that I
a
mean,
competitor, not a competitor, a colleague of yours, Heather Cox Richardson, has been the focal point of liberals. History professor Heather
yeah, yeah.
Cox.
I
That's
know but I would just say like I mean, maybe this is the same for me, but when she talks about politics, she's not being a historian.
oh no, that's yeah,
She is a good historian if you read her history books.
agreed.
I always say just don't read the intro or the conclusion, and she's a great historian.
Yeah, agreed. All right, Mayor Anderson, thank you so much for joining us. Jake, do you have or Bart? Do you have one last concluding remark, or can we close this off for today?
I think we can close it off. One thing I do want to say, because I'm going to forget to say it in the future, in a future one of our things, is that I've come to, Stephen, I think I listened to the same podcast you listened to with former Justice Breyer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And one of the interesting things, a point he made that I thought was a good one, and it's something I learned in law school, but it doesn't seem to be something people care about anymore or understand about lawyers, is that number one, courts don't do anything if somebody doesn't file a lawsuit first.
Right.
So they're basically a passive unit of government, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
But
One.
one of the things, what's that, John?
You said three things. That's one.
Okay. Two. One of the things I was always taught that a judge will look for is, how do I actually do justice in this case? You know, they want to look at the law. They want to look at how the facts, you know, how you apply the law to the facts. But they also want to kind of go, okay, who are these people in front of me, and what is going to work to fix this controversy? And one of the things that I think I disagree with, like the Federalist Society view on things, is that they don't, the whole idea of what is justice doesn't seem to work for the originalist interpretation of the Constitution. And that kind of concerns me, because I do think Justice Breyer kind of overstates the case with his pragmatism. But I think what people don't understand is that when a judge is being asked to decide a case, if you decide it just based on what you think the actual meaning of the Constitution is in any given situation, you may someday, and Breyer actually said this, which I think is overstating the case, you may end up with a Constitution that nobody wants.
So, Bart, I need to interrupt you because we're way over.
Please.
Just so you know, we will be reviewing Article 3 as well, because I want citizens. I believe my concluding remark is, I believe this is the year of the citizen. This is the time for us to really think through. I'm not fearful against President Trump. One John Brackney, one guy in a little suburb of one middle, state. I know he's the president. We should respect the president, but I'm not fearful of him. I think we need to have, 350 million Americans not be fearful of the president. We need to stand up and do the right thing and let our system work. And so anyway, that's my, on your point, Bart. No, Rehnquist and Scalia are so articulate. You're more on the liberal side. Of course, it may be an unjust decision. That's Congress to make that decision. They need to review it and change the law. That's not for a court to create what might be just or not. I'm sorry to try to channel their thoughts in a layman's terms. We'll talk about that. So I'm glad you brought it up. Was there a third point, or did you make your point on that?
I think I've forgotten what my third point was, so it was not important.
I'm an originalist, so I gotta push back hard on you. It's not the judge's job to be worried about that outcome. Sorry.
Well, and to be honest, John, I'm right with you. I'm an originalist too, but I also recognize that there are times where a court is going to make a hard decision.
Yep.
And an originalist is going to go, well, wait a minute, the law doesn't say that. But a judge has to go there. And that's just the way it works. You can't ask human beings to make decisions that are going to be harmful to people.
Well, that's what Sarah Isgur always says, that she has a carve out. It's called "Bad Guy Stays in Jail."
Exactly.
Exactly,
Stephen.
The judges will find a way so that the bad guy stays in jail. And I think I don't think I necessarily disagree with you, Bart. I disagree with you at and I would say Justice Breyer, at the extremes and at the federal level, because I think that in many ways I'm being won over by the argument that our court system is doing a fantastic job of creating a common law that makes a lot of sense for people at the local level, because justices are often, or judges dealing with people's real problems, are trying to achieve justice within the law. And that creates, but what that often does,
local, municipal, and county judges.
Yeah, right. The working judges, right, who are looking at this situation that has been brought to them, and they're making the best decision possible to achieve justice in this particular situation. And the other thing that comes out of that is you get the minimum, because what we're saying is, in this particular situation, this is what justice is. Right. And that's and we'll let that evolve. But the problem is, when you get up to the federal level and you have the Supreme Court of the United States saying, now, I know what's best for everybody and what will be justice for 330 million people. And this has now gone from being something coming from the bottom up to the top down, where I say, no, now the pendulum for me has swung.
Yeah.
But I want first the text, then they say text, history, and tradition. So history, and then the tradition of how it's been ruled on in the past. But to me, it's not an either or, it's a level of government issue.
Lovely. And I think that's a really wise distinction where there's some room for agreement, except for the far left and maybe the far right.
Yeah, the people, and here's the crazy thing. Here's something I want to put on everybody's radar for 2025, is that I wonder if we'll finally get somebody to really articulate that you don't get to be in control of someone else's mind. I feel like the very first, the source of every freedom in the American legal tradition, all the good ones, come from liberty of conscience. And I just don't hear people defending liberty of conscience.
Nice.
And you can't regulate conscience either. You can regulate someone's behavior, and then you can look at intent when they've done something wrong. That's different.
Your speech you can regulate, but you can't get in your head.
Right. But I would also say, yeah, I mean, there are time, place, and manner restrictions on speech. But what I really want people to understand is that, and this is where I hope all of the DEI stuff just collapses, is that you cannot regulate what I think. You can punish me if I do something wrong and then look at my intent for doing that wrong thing. But you can't actually say to a group of employees, you must hold my political beliefs in order to have a job here. And I just have never heard really anybody articulate that anywhere.
Oh, there's somebody, Ben Sass, maybe.
Maybe.
Let's be thinking on that. And Bart, I'd like you to make a legal defense of equity in a future show. So you be pondering the difference between equality and equity, and see if you can make a good pitch. If you don't totally disagree, don't do it. But I think you're actually a good person to argue for equity and why we should understand that term better. Professor, thank you for your conversation. Oh, you want to?
There's just something. There's an article written by the dean of the Harvard Law School in a journal called like Equity in Law, and it was an article about the distinction between equity and equality in American law. So,
who was the professor, or who's the
I just remember I think it was a woman, and I think she was the dean of the Harvard Law School.
Harvard Law. Okay. Because I think we're doing a disservice to each other by not understanding some terms that actually are valuable in society.
I want to say the name of the journal was something like Equality in Law or something was the name of the journal. Yeah, I'll find it and send it to you guys later.
All right, thank you. Professor, thanks for your conversation today. Mayor Anderson, thanks for joining us. Bart, again, it's nice to have a lawyer as our legal counsel.
You're a lawyer too, John.
I have a law degree. I am not a lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Have a wonderful day. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Hi. Happy New Year, everybody.
Again.